At 2:47 p.m. on March 18, 1945, First Lieutenant Daniel Hartwell sat in the pilot's seat of a B-24J Liberator nicknamed Iron Phoenix, watching the industrial sprawl of Berlin disappear beneath a curtain of smoke and flame. 25 years old, 31 combat missions, zero margin for error. The 458th Bombardment Group had just completed their bombing run over the Tempelhof Railway marshalling yards in the heart of Nazi Germany's capital. Berlin was the most heavily defended city in Europe. 1,028 anti-aircraft guns ringed the city in 3 defensive belts. German Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s prowled the sky in formations of 12 to 16 aircraft. Every mission to Berlin was Russian roulette. In March 1945, 1 out of every 7 bombers sent to Berlin did not return. Hartwell's B-24 was part of a 72 aircraft formation from the 458th, flying out of Horsham St. Faith Airfield in Norfolk, England. The mission briefing had been direct. Strike the Tempelhof marshalling yards, destroy the switching stations, cripple Germany's ability to move troops by rail, return to base. The formation had penetrated German airspace at dawn, climbing to 24,000 feet to stay above the heaviest flak concentrations. The approach had been clean, limited fighter contact, no mechanical problems. Iron Phoenix held position in the middle of the formation, surrounded by other B-24s whose propellers churned the frozen air into invisible turbulence. Then they reached the initial point. From the IP to the target, bombers flew straight and level. No evasive action. The Norden bomb site required absolute stability. For 4 minutes, the formation was completely predictable. For 4 minutes, every anti-aircraft battery knew exactly where the bombers would be. The flak started immediately. Black puffs of 88 mm and 105 mm explosions appeared at altitude. Hartwell felt the concussions through the control yoke. Each burst sent shock waves through the airframe. Metal fragments punched holes through aluminum skin. Iron Phoenix shuddered as shrapnel tore through the wings and tail. Second Lieutenant Victor Castellano sat in the co-pilot seat, monitoring engine instruments. Second Lieutenant Patrick Donnelly occupied the bombardier station in the nose. I pressed to the Norden site. Second Lieutenant Samuel Rothstein navigated from the compartment beside Donnelly. 8 more men were stationed throughout the aircraft. Technical Sergeant Warren Ashford served as flight engineer. Staff Sergeant Malcolm Hayes manned the top turret. Staff Sergeant Anthony DeMarco operated the ball turret beneath the fuselage. Staff Sergeant Eugene Braddock handled radio communications. Staff Sergeant Leonard Murphy and Staff Sergeant Vincent Gallagher covered the waist guns. Staff Sergeant Robert Sinclair operated the tail gun. Donnelly released the bomb load at 2:46 p.m. 12 500-pound bombs dropped toward the railway yards 24,000 feet below. The B-24 lurched upward as 6 tons of high explosive fell away. Hartwell banked left, following the formation toward the rally point. But at 2:47 p.m., exactly 60 seconds after bombs away, a German 88mm shell detonated 8 feet below the nose section. The explosion was not a direct hit. The shell exploded close enough that the blast wave and shrapnel pattern caught the underside of the fuselage. Shrapnel tore through the aluminum skin like tissue paper. Fragments ripped through hydraulic lines, electrical conduits, oxygen bottles, and structural supports. The nose section separated from the rest of the fuselage, not completely. The nose peeled downward, connected only by a few strips of torn aluminum and a single control cable. The bombardier compartment and navigator compartment were now hanging beneath the aircraft by approximately 3 feet, held in place only by fragments of metal skin and 1/4-inch steel cable that ran from the cockpit to the rudder pedals in the nose section. Donnelly and Rothstein were still in the nose. They were alive. The compartment had not depressurized catastrophically because it was still partially attached, but they were trapped. The passageway that normally connected the nose to the cockpit was gone. In its place was a 3-foot gap of screaming wind and sub-zero air. The nose section was swinging back and forth beneath the aircraft like a pendulum. Each swing created stress on the remaining connection points. Metal was tearing. The cable was the only thing preventing the entire nose section from dropping into the sky. Hartwell saw it immediately. He could feel it through the control yoke. The aircraft's center of gravity had shifted forward. The nose was trying to pitch down. He was pulling back on the yoke with both hands, fighting to keep the bomber level. Castellano had his hands on the yoke too. Together, they were barely maintaining control. The B-24 wanted to nose over into a dive. If they lost control for even 3 seconds, the aircraft would enter a spiral. At 24,000 feet, in a damaged aircraft with the nose section torn open, they would not recover. Technical Sergeant Warren Ashford appeared between the pilot seats. He had been at his flight engineer station when the shell hit. He had felt the impact. He had heard the tearing metal. He had seen the nose section drop away through the gap that now existed where the floor should be. He looked at Hartwell and said 4 words: "Donnelly and Rothstein are alive." Hartwell processed this information. 2 men trapped in a compartment hanging beneath the aircraft by a single cable. The cable was visible through the gap in the floor. It was a standard aircraft control cable, 1/4-inch diameter, braided steel, rated for 2,000 pounds of tensile strength. The nose section weighed approximately 800 pounds. Donnelly weighed 165 pounds. Rothstein weighed 170 pounds. Total weight, 1,135 pounds. The cable was supporting roughly 57% of its rated capacity. Under normal conditions, this would be safe, but these were not normal conditions. The cable was being subjected to dynamic loading. Every time the nose section swung, the cable experienced shock loads that could exceed 3,000 pounds. The cable was fraying. Ashford could see individual strands beginning to separate. The standard procedure for this situation did not exist because this situation was not supposed to be possible. But the immediate problem was clear. If the cable snapped, the nose section would fall. Donnelly and Rothstein would die. The aircraft's center of gravity would shift even further forward. The B-24 would become uncontrollable. Everyone aboard would die. Ashford's analysis was immediate. The cable had to be supported. Someone had to take weight off the cable to prevent it from snapping. The cable ran from the rudder pedal assembly in the nose up through the gap to the rudder control system in the tail. The cable was under constant tension. The only option was to physically support it, to hold it, to take some of the dynamic load by hand, to reduce the shock loading every time the nose section swung. If you want to see how Ashford held that cable for 7 minutes until his hands split open, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Ashford. The immediate problem was access. The cable was in the gap. The gap was 3 feet wide. Wind was screaming through at 210 miles per hour. The temperature outside was minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The air pressure at 24,000 feet was less than half what it was at sea level. Without supplemental oxygen, a man would pass out in 30 seconds. The crew was breathing through oxygen masks connected to the aircraft's oxygen system by rubber hoses. But the hoses were only 6 feet long. To reach the cable, someone would have to disconnect from the oxygen system, cross the gap, grab the cable, and hold it while the nose section swung beneath the aircraft. Ashford explained this to Hartwell in 3 short sentences. There was no debate. Hartwell looked at the altimeter. 24,000 feet. He looked at the airspeed indicator, 210 miles per hour. He looked at the formation. Other bombers were pulling away. Iron Phoenix was losing speed because of the massive drag created by the torn open nose section. They were becoming a straggler. German fighters circled stragglers like wolves. The decision was obvious. Ashford had to try. He had to reach that cable. He had to hold it, or everyone was going to die. Ashford moved to the gap. He could see the cable clearly now. It was vibrating. The tension was visible. The frayed strands were catching sunlight. He estimated he had maybe 4 minutes before the cable failed completely. The nose section was swinging more violently now. Each swing was tearing more strands. He removed his oxygen mask. Immediately, his vision began to narrow. Hypoxia set in within seconds at this altitude. He had approximately 20 seconds of useful consciousness. He took 3 deep breaths, hyperventilating to saturate his blood with oxygen. Then he reached into the gap. Wind hit his arm like a physical wall. 210 miles per hour of air pressure trying to rip his arm off. He braced his feet against the remaining floor structure. He extended his arm further. His gloved hand touched the cable. It was vibrating so violently he could barely maintain contact. He wrapped his fingers around it. The cable was cold. Even through his heavy leather flight glove, he could feel the temperature. Minus 40 degrees, conducted through quarter-inch steel. He pulled his arm back. He had made contact. He knew he could reach it. But he also knew that 20 seconds was not enough time. He needed to hold this cable for minutes, not seconds. He needed a way to breathe while holding the cable. He looked at Castellano. Castellano understood immediately. He unbuckled his harness. He moved to Ashford's position. He brought his oxygen mask with him. The hose was 6 feet long. If Ashford leaned into the gap and Castellano held the oxygen mask to his face every 15 seconds, Ashford could maintain consciousness indefinitely. It was insane. It violated every safety protocol, but it was the only option. Ashford positioned himself at the edge of the gap. He sat down, legs dangling into the void. Below him, 24,000 feet of empty air. Below that, the forests of central Germany. He could see the ground through the gap, roads, villages, rivers. The world was very far away. He gripped the cable with both hands. The vibration traveled up his arms. He could feel every oscillation of the nose section. Each swing created a shock wave that ran through the cable and into his shoulders. The weight was immediate. When Ashford gripped the cable, he was not supporting the full weight. He was dampening the oscillations. He was reducing the dynamic loading. Every time the nose section swung, his grip absorbed some of the shock. His hands became part of the structural system. Flesh and bone and tendon were now integral to keeping the aircraft intact. Castellano held the oxygen mask to Ashford's face. Ashford took 3 breaths. Castellano pulled the mask away. Ashford held the cable. 15 seconds passed. Castellano returned with the mask. 3 breaths. The mask went away. This became the rhythm. Hold. Breathe. Hold. Breathe. The cable was cutting into Ashford's gloves. He could feel the pressure through the leather. The braided steel was finding its way through the material. His grip was crushing his own fingers against the cable. In the nose section, Donnelly and Rothstein were trying to stabilize themselves. The bombardier compartment had not been designed for this. There were no handholds, no safety harnesses. The floor was canted at a 15-degree angle. Every time the nose swung, they slid toward the plexiglass nose cone. If the plexiglass failed, they would fall out. Donnelly had wedged himself against the Norden bomb site. Rothstein had braced himself in the navigator's station, legs against the chart table. They could see the ground below. They could see the cable above. They could see Ashford's hands gripping it. They understood that their lives depended on his grip strength. Back in the cockpit, Hartwell was flying on instruments and feel. The artificial horizon was useless. The nose section's weight was pulling the aircraft into a constant descent. He was using engine power to maintain altitude. The 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830 engines were producing maximum continuous power. Fuel consumption was double normal rate. Castellano was calculating range. They had approximately 100 gallons remaining. At current consumption rate, they had 90 minutes of flight time. The English coast was 425 miles northwest. At their current speed of 180 miles per hour, reduced from normal cruising speed due to drag, they needed 2 hours and 22 minutes to reach England. The mathematics were simple. They did not have enough fuel to reach England. They would run out of fuel over the North Sea. A ditching in the North Sea in March was a death sentence. Water temperature was 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time was approximately 15 minutes before hypothermia caused loss of consciousness. But there was another option. P-51 Mustangs were orbiting the rally point. If Hartwell could reach the rally point, the fighters could provide protection from German interceptors. More importantly, the fighter pilots could radio Iron Phoenix's position to air-sea rescue coordinators. If the B-24 went down in the North Sea, rescue crews would know exactly where to search. Hartwell turned northwest. He pushed the throttles forward. The engines responded with increased power and increased fuel consumption. Castellano revised his calculations. At this power setting, they had 75 minutes of flight time. The rally point was 40 miles ahead. They could make it. Probably, if the engines did not fail, if the nose section did not tear off, if Ashford could continue holding the cable. At 2:51 p.m., 4 minutes after the shell hit, Ashford's hands began to fail. The leather gloves were designed for cold weather protection, not sustained gripping of vibrating steel cable. The cable had worn through the outer layer of leather. It was now in contact with the inner lining. The cable was cutting through. Ashford could feel it. Sharp pain in both palms. The cable was beginning to cut into his skin. He maintained his grip. Castellano brought the oxygen mask to his face. 3 breaths. The mask went away. The nose section swung violently to the left. A gust of wind had caught it. The cable jerked in Ashford's hands. The sudden load was overwhelming. His fingers opened involuntarily. The cable slipped. He caught it again, but lower down, closer to the gap. His grip was weaker now. His hands were cramping. The cold was penetrating his gloves. He could not feel his fingers anymore. He was holding the cable through muscle memory and willpower. In the waist gun positions, Murphy and Gallagher were watching the formation. Other B-24s were a quarter mile ahead now. Iron Phoenix was falling behind at approximately 30 miles per hour. Within 10 minutes, they would be completely alone. Gallagher saw movement at 4 o'clock high. He grabbed the intercom. Fighters, 4 o'clock high. The fighters were FOU-190s. 4 of them. They were diving. The German pilots had spotted Iron Phoenix. A damaged bomber separated from the formation was the easiest kill a fighter pilot could hope for. The 190s came in from the right rear quarter. Their 20mm cannons and 13mm machine guns opened fire at 800 yards. Tracers arced through the sky. Hayes opened fire with the top turret. 2 50-caliber machine guns firing 800 rounds per minute. Murphy and Gallagher fired their waist guns. Sinclair fired the twin tail guns. DeMarco fired from the ball turret. 5 gun positions. 10 50-caliber machine guns. 8,000 rounds per minute. The defensive fire disrupted the German aim. The 190s broke left at 400 yards. They climbed away, preparing for another pass. Hartwell watched them go. He knew they would be back. Ashford was still holding the cable. He had not let go during the fighter attack. His hands were bleeding now. The cable had cut through his gloves completely. It was cutting into his palms. He could feel wet warmth running down his wrists. Blood. His blood was freezing on the cable. The temperature at 24,000 feet was cold enough that his blood was forming ice crystals as it left his body. The ice was actually helping his grip. It was providing friction. But it was also evidence that he was being injured, severely. At 2:54 p.m., 7 minutes after the shell hit, Iron Phoenix reached the rally point. The formation was there. 71 B-24s in a defensive box formation. The P-51 Mustangs were orbiting above. Hartwell keyed the radio. "This is Iron Phoenix to rally leader. We have sustained catastrophic damage. Nose section partially separated. 2 men trapped. Request immediate escort and air-sea rescue standby." The response came immediately. "Iron Phoenix, this is rally leader. Confirm your status. Can you maintain formation?" "Negative. We are losing airspeed. We'll continue northwest toward home. Request fighter escort." "Roger. Iron Phoenix. Escort assigned. Yellow flight. Maintain position on Iron Phoenix. Air-sea rescue has been notified." 4 P-51s broke from the main escort group. They formed up around Iron Phoenix. The pilots could see the damage. They could see the torn fuselage. They could see the nose section hanging beneath the aircraft. They could see Ashford in the gap, holding the cable. One of the P-51 pilots radioed to his wingman. "Jesus Christ! That man is holding the nose on with his bare hands." The FW-190s saw the P-51 escort and broke off. German fighters did not engage Mustangs unless they had overwhelming numerical superiority. The 190s climbed away and disappeared. Iron Phoenix was safe from fighters. 4E now, but the fuel situation was becoming critical. Castellano's latest calculations showed 45 minutes of flight time remaining. The English coast was still 310 miles away. At current speed, they needed 1 hour and 43 minutes. They were going to run out of fuel 98 miles short of England. They were going to ditch in the North Sea. Hartwell keyed the radio again. "Rally leader, Iron Phoenix. Fuel state critical. Will not make landfall. Estimate ditching position 52 degrees north, 3 degrees east. Request air-sea rescue deploy to that position." "Roger. Iron Phoenix. Rescue crews are launching now. Maintain current heading." One of the P-51 pilots radioed a suggestion. "Iron Phoenix, this is Yellow One. What if you reduce altitude? Descend to 10,000 feet. Warmer air, more oxygen. Might buy you some time." Hartwell considered this. Descending would increase air density. The engines would produce more power. Fuel consumption would decrease slightly. The warmer temperature would help Ashford. More oxygen would mean he would not need the mask every 15 seconds. The only problem was the descent itself. The nose would want to drop further. The cable would experience additional loading. But staying at altitude was not working. Yellow 1, Iron Phoenix. We're descending to 10,000. Slow descent, 200 feet per minute. Hartwell began the descent. He reduced power on all 4 engines simultaneously. The B-24 began sinking, slowly, gently. The nose section swung more violently as the angle changed. Ashford felt it through the cable. The loading increased. His grip tightened involuntarily. More pain, more blood. The cable was slick now, blood and ice. His hands were sliding. He shifted his grip, wrapped the cable around his wrists, locked his forearms together. The cable was cutting into his wrists now, through the flight suit into the flesh. But the grip was more secure. The descent took 12 minutes. At 3:10 p.m., Iron Phoenix leveled off at 10,000 feet. The temperature had increased to minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The air pressure was 70% of sea level. Ashford could breathe without the oxygen mask. Castellano pulled the mask away. Ashford took a deep breath. The cold air burned his lungs. But it was air. He could breathe on his own. This changed everything. He no longer needed Castellano to hold the mask to his face every 15 seconds. He could focus entirely on holding the cable. His hands were useless now. They were torn apart. But his forearms were intact. He was using his wrists and forearms to maintain tension on the cable. The fuel situation improved marginally. At 10,000 feet, the engines were more efficient. Castellano recalculated. They now had 50 minutes of flight time remaining. The coast was 280 miles away. At current speed of 190 miles per hour, they needed 1 hour and 28 minutes. They were still going to run out of fuel 38 miles short of England. At 3:22 p.m., Hartwell made a decision. All crew, pilot, prepare to ditch. Check your Mae Wests. Secure all loose equipment. Waist gunners, prepare life rafts. We're going into the water in approximately 25 minutes. The crew began preparations. Murphy and Gallagher pulled the life rafts from storage. The rafts were rubber, equipped with CO2 cartridges for inflation. Each raft could hold 6 men. Iron Phoenix carried 2 rafts. In the nose section, Donnelly and Rothstein braced themselves. They understood they would hit first. The nose would strike the water at 90 miles per hour. The plexiglass would implode. Water would flood the compartment. They had maybe 5 seconds to escape through the overhead hatch. They positioned themselves beneath the hatch. Donnelly put his hand on the release mechanism. Ashford was still holding the cable. His wrists were cut to the bone. He could see tendons, white cords visible through torn flesh. The blood flow had slowed. His hands were blue. Frostbite, 3rd degree. His fingers were frozen solid, but he was still holding. At 3:35 p.m., the number 3 engine quit. Fuel starvation. Hartwell feathered the propeller. Speed decreased to 170 miles per hour. Castellano recalculated. They had perhaps 8 minutes of fuel remaining. The coast was 60 miles away. At 3:38 p.m., the number 4 engine quit. 2 engines dead. The B-24 could not maintain altitude. Hartwell began descending. He had perhaps 4 minutes of fuel left. Altitude was 8,000 feet. Descent rate was 400 feet per minute. He keyed the radio one last time. Yellow flight, Iron Phoenix. We're going in. Request you mark our position and maintain orbit until rescue arrives. Roger, Iron Phoenix, we'll be right here. At 3:42 p.m., engines 1 and 2 quit simultaneously. The B-24 was now a glider. Hartwell had to glide 14 miles to the water. The glide ratio of a B-24 was approximately 8.1. From 5,600 feet, they could glide approximately 8.5 miles. They were 5.5 miles short. The silence was overwhelming. For 3 hours, the crew had lived inside constant engine noise. Now nothing, just wind, the whistle of air over the wings, the creak of stressed aluminum. Ashford was still holding the cable. He had been holding it for 45 minutes. His wrists were destroyed. He was holding through locked joints and residual muscle tension. Castellano was beside him, one hand on his shoulder. "Warren, we're going in. You need to let go. You need to get to a brace position." Ashford did not respond. He could not respond. He was beyond speech, beyond pain, beyond rational thought. He was holding the cable because that was what he was doing. Hartwell lined up on the waves. He could see them clearly now. Dark water, white foam. The waves were running southwest to northeast. He would land along that axis. The B-24 was descending through 2,000 feet. Airspeed was 120 miles per hour. Too fast. He tried to deploy the flaps. Hydraulic pressure was gone. The flaps did not move. 1,000 feet. 500 feet. He pulled back on. The yoke. He was flaring. Trying to reduce descent rate. The nose wanted to drop. He pulled harder. Castellano was pulling too. 200 feet. 100 feet. 50 feet. Impact. The nose section hit first. Donnelly and Rothstein experienced sudden deceleration from 120 miles per hour to 0 in 0.3 seconds. The forces were catastrophic. Donnelly's body was thrown forward against the Norden bomb site. 3 ribs fractured. His face struck the metal housing. Cheekbone fractured, teeth broken. Rothstein was thrown against the navigator's table. Left arm broken, skull fracture. Both men were instantly unconscious. The plexiglass nose cone shattered. Water flooded the compartment in less than 2 seconds. The nose section was completely submerged within 4 seconds. The overhead hatch was jammed. The impact had warped the frame. Donnelly and Rothstein were trapped underwater, unconscious, drowning. The main fuselage hit 1 second later. The belly struck a wave at 120 miles per hour. The aluminum skin crumpled. The impact threw every crew member forward. Ashford was ripped away from the cable. His wrists tore free. Flesh separated. He was thrown into the bulkhead behind the pilot's seats. His head struck metal. Instant unconsciousness. The bomber skipped. It bounced off the first wave and became briefly airborne. Then it struck a second wave. Harder. The fuselage cracked. Water began flooding through gaps in the skin. The ball turret was ripped completely off. DeMarco was inside. He was still strapped into the turret harness when it separated. The ball turret sank immediately. DeMarco drowned within 30 seconds, trapped 200 feet beneath the surface. The bomber struck a third wave and stopped. The nose section was completely underwater. The main fuselage was floating but settling rapidly. Water was pouring in. The B-24 would sink in less than 3 minutes. Hartwell regained consciousness immediately. His face was bleeding. The control yoke had struck his forehead. Blood ran into his eyes. He unbuckled his harness. He looked at Castellano. Castellano was moving, alive. "Get out. Get the rafts deployed." Castellano climbed out of his seat. He staggered toward the waist section. Water was already knee-deep in the cockpit. Murphy and Gallagher were at the waist gun window, throwing the life rafts out. The rafts hit the water and inflated automatically. Yellow rubber against dark blue water. Sinclair climbed out of the tail section. He was limping, ankle broken. He reached the waist window and jumped. He hit the water and went under. The Mae West inflated. He surfaced. The water was shockingly cold. 39 degrees. His entire body went into shock, muscles seized. He flailed toward the nearest raft. Murphy was already there. Murphy grabbed Sinclair and hauled him into the raft. Braddock climbed out next. He jumped and swam to the raft. Hayes followed, then Gallagher. 5 men in the first raft. Castellano jumped and swam to the second raft. Hartwell looked around the cockpit. Where was Ashford? He saw him slumped against the bulkhead, unconscious, bleeding. Hartwell grabbed him under the arms and dragged him towards the waist section. The water was waist deep now. The aircraft was settling fast. The nose was completely submerged. Hartwell dragged Ashford to the waist window. He pushed him through. Ashford's body fell into the water. Hartwell jumped after him. He surfaced and grabbed Ashford. The Mae West had not inflated properly. Hartwell pulled the manual inflation toggle. CO2 filled the vest. Ashford's head came up above water, still unconscious. Hartwell swam toward the second raft, dragging Ashford. He reached the raft. Castellano grabbed Ashford and hauled him in. Then Hartwell climbed aboard. He looked back at the bomber. The fuselage was vertical now. The tail was pointing straight up. Then it slipped beneath the surface. Gone. Iron Phoenix sank in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Hartwell counted heads: Ashford, Castellano, himself. 3 in this raft. He looked at the other raft. Murphy, Gallagher, Braddock, Hayes, Sinclair. 5 in that raft. Total, 8. 8 out of 12 crew members. He called across the water. Donnelly? Rothstein? DeMarco? No response. Donnelly and Rothstein were still in the nose section. Trapped. Drowned. DeMarco was in the ball turret at the bottom of the sea. 3 dead. The P-51 Mustangs were overhead. They radioed the position to Air-Sea Rescue. Rescue Control, Yellow 1. Iron Phoenix is down. Position 52 degrees, 18 minutes north. 3 degrees, 47 minutes east. 8 survivors in 2 rafts. 3 men missing, presumed dead. Request immediate rescue deployment. Roger, Yellow 1. Rescue boat is en route. ETA 45 minutes. Ashford regained consciousness. He was lying in the bottom of the raft. He tried to sit up. Pain exploded in his wrists and hand. He looked down. His gloves were gone. His wrists were shredded. Bone and tendon visible. His hands were frozen solid. Blue. Black in places. Frostbite. 3rd degree. The fingers were locked in a permanent grip position. He could not straighten them. The damage was catastrophic. Hartwell looked at the injuries and knew immediately. These hands would never function normally again. Castellano was trying to warm Ashford. He had pulled off his own flight jacket and wrapped it around Ashford's shoulders, but it was not enough. The cold was everywhere. The air temperature was 35 degrees. The wind was 25 knots. Wind chill made it feel like 20 degrees. They were wet, shivering. Hypothermia was beginning. Hartwell forced himself to stay alert. Stay awake. Everyone stay awake. Talk to each other. At 4:25 p.m., 88 minutes after the shell hit, a British air-sea rescue launch appeared on the horizon. The boat crew maneuvered alongside. The rafts were pulled against the hull. The survivors were lifted aboard one by one. Ashford was unconscious again. Blood loss, hypothermia, shock. The rescue crew carried him below deck. They wrapped him in blankets. They started an IV. They examined his hands. One crew member looked at the injuries and shook his head. "We need to get him to a hospital, fast. These hands are gone." The rescue boat turned toward the English coast. Full speed. The boat reached Lowestoft Harbor. at 6:15 p.m. Ambulances were waiting. Ashford was transported immediately to the Royal Air Force Hospital at Ely. Army surgeons examined him. The diagnosis was immediate. Bilateral traumatic amputation necessary. Both hands would be removed at the wrist. The tissue damage was too extensive. There was no option for reconstruction. The surgery was performed on March 19, 1945. Surgeons removed both hands at the wrist joint. The stumps were debrided and closed with silk sutures. Ashford remained unconscious for 30 hours. Hartwell and the other survivors were treated for minor injuries. Broken bones were set. Hypothermia was reversed. They were debriefed by intelligence officers. They described the mission, the flak hit, the torn nose section, Ashford holding the cable, the ditching, Donnelly, Rothstein, and DeMarco's deaths. Donnelly and Rothstein's bodies were never recovered. They went down with the aircraft. They were declared killed in action. They were posthumously awarded the Air Medal. They were 24 and 25 years old. DeMarco's body was also never recovered. He was declared killed in action. He was awarded the Air Medal posthumously. He was 23 years old. Ashford regained consciousness on March 20th. He looked at his arms. Both ended at the wrists, bandaged stumps. The reality was immediate. His hands were gone. His career as a flight engineer was over. A doctor explained, "You saved 8 lives, including your own. You held that cable when no one else could have. You're a hero." Ashford did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man with no hands. He asked about Donnelly, Rothstein, and DeMarco. The doctor told him they had not made it. Ashford closed his eyes. He had held the cable to save them, and they had died anyway. Hartwell visited him the next day. "Warren, if you hadn't held that cable, the nose would have torn off in the air. We would have lost control. All 12 of us would have died. You gave us time to reach the water. You gave us a chance to ditch controlled. You saved 8 lives." Ashford spent 6 weeks in the hospital. He underwent 2 additional surgeries to revise the amputation sites. By May 1945, Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Ashford was transferred to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. He underwent rehabilitation. He learned to use prosthetic hooks, crude devices that allowed him to grip objects. Not hands, never hands again, but functional enough for basic tasks. He was medically discharged from the Army Air Forces in August 1945. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism. The citation read, "For heroism while participating in aerial flight, Technical Sergeant Warren Ashford, on 18th of March 1945, sustained severe injuries while holding a damaged control cable for 45 minutes, preventing the loss of aircraft and crew. His actions saved 8 lives." Ashford returned to Portland, Oregon. He was 26 years old. He had no hands. He struggled. The Veterans Administration provided disability compensation. Enough to survive. He lived with his parents. He struggled with depression. He had nightmares about the cable, about Donnelly and Rothstein drowning, about his hands being cut apart. In 1947, he met a woman named Claire Thornton. She was a nurse at the VA hospital. She saw past the prosthetics. She saw the man. They married in 1948. They had 2 children, a son in 1949, a daughter in 1951. Ashford found work as a telephone operator, a job that required only his voice. He could use the prosthetics to hold papers and manipulate basic controls. It was not the life he had planned, but it was a life. Hartwell returned to civilian life in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He became a commercial pilot for Northwest Airlines. He flew DC-6 and later Boeing 707s. He retired in 1975 after 30 years of civilian flying. He and Ashford exchanged letters occasionally. They met at 458th Bombardment Group reunions. They never discussed the mission in detail. They remembered. That was enough. Castellano returned to Philadelphia. He attended the University of Pennsylvania on the GI Bill. He earned a degree in engineering. He worked for General Electric. He married 3 children. He retired in 1980. Hayes settled in Detroit. He worked for Ford Motor Company for 32 years. He died in 1988 from heart disease. He was 66. Murphy returned to Denver. He became a postal worker for 35 years. He never married. He died in 1992 at age 69. Gallagher moved to Los Angeles. He opened an auto repair shop. He retired in 1985. He died in 1998 at age 76. Braddock stayed in the military. He made the Air Force a career. He served in Korea. He retired as a master sergeant in 1965. He settled in Tucson. He died in 2003 at age 81. Sinclair returned to Atlanta. He worked for Coca-Cola. He retired in 1978. He died in 2006 at age 84. Daniel Hartwell died in 2008 at age 88. He had lived a full life. He had seen his children grow. He had held his grandchildren. But the mission he remembered most clearly was March 18th, 1945. The shell that tore open Iron Phoenix, Ashford in the Gap, holding the cable, the ditching in the North Sea, the 3 men who did not come home. Warren Ashford died in 2014 at age 95. He had outlived most of his crew. His children and grandchildren attended his funeral. They knew about the cable. They knew about his hands. They knew about the 45 minutes that had defined his life. One of his grandchildren asked, "Was it worth it?" Ashford's son answered, 8 men came home because of what he did. 8 men had families, children, grandchildren. Hundreds of lives exist because my father held that cable. Yes, it was worth it. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about flight engineers who held control cables with their bare hands until the flesh tore away. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Daniel Hartwell, Warren Ashford, and the crew of Iron Phoenix don't disappear into silence. Second Lieutenant Patrick Donnelly drowned when the nose section flooded on impact. Second Lieutenant Samuel Rothstein died beside him in the navigator's station. Staff Sergeant Anthony DeMarco went down with the ball turret in 180 feet of water. They were 24, 25, and 23 years old. They never came home. But the 8 men who survived carried their memory forward for weeks in British hospitals, for decades afterward in Portland, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Detroit, Denver, Los Angeles, Tucson, and Atlanta, and across America. And now, through this story, their names live on.